Welcome to the Idea to Value podcast, where in every episode we highlight the latest insights into creativity and innovation from experts around the world. I'm your host, Nick Skillicorn. I care about the evidence behind what makes ideas happen, and I've already helped thousands of people just like you through my unique insights into recent scientific findings of how creativity works. I also show you how to turbocharge innovation programs so they finally deliver on the value and ideas you've been struggling to execute. Get your free training on how creativity can be improved by registering now at www.ideatovalue.com. Now let's get on with today's episode. Hello everyone, and welcome to the very first ever episode number 1 of the Idea to Value podcast. I'm your host, Nick Skillicorn, and I just want to say a quick thank you for joining me in this exploration of creativity and innovation. Coming up on this podcast, episode number 1, I'm going to be giving you some really interesting insights into how your creativity actually works. But first of all, I want to just give you a quick highlight as to what to expect in the upcoming episodes and what exactly Idea to Value is. Now, as you may or may not know, ideatovalue.com is one of the world's leading online blogs with multiple authors on the subject of creativity and innovation. We get leading articles and insight pieces every week on how to improve your creativity, how to improve your innovation success rate at work. And in addition to that, we also do a lot of media such as podcasts, videos, interviews, webinars, and provide a lot of free training for people who register to the site as well on how they can improve their creative ability. So before you do anything else, I'd recommend going over to ideatovalue.com right now and making sure you've registered for your free membership. So what is this podcast about, and what is Idea to Value about? Well, as I mentioned, it's about giving you insights on improving your creativity. It's about giving you insights into building innovation capabilities. And I'll be doing this not only based on my own research and my own experience in the field, but by doing pretty in-depth interviews with artists, entrepreneurs, and successful innovators to learn from them what it takes to finally get their ideas out there and start delivering value from them. But what I think makes this podcast and Idea to Value in general so different from a lot of the other advice that you get from innovation experts and creativity experts out there is that I put a lot of emphasis on everything being backed up by evidence. So for example, later on in today's episode, I'll be talking about the science behind creativity. And this seems to be a bit of an oxymoron when it comes to a lot of people who think that creativity is all about the arts and this sort of ethereal capability that some people have and that some people don't have. Whereas what I want you to understand through this episode and the upcoming episodes is that there's actually a lot of research out there into the field of creativity and innovation on what goes on in the brain when you're having ideas, what goes on in team dynamics when people are sharing these ideas, and based on those insights, how you can improve your ability to not only have these ideas, but actually make them happen as well. So a bit about myself. Well, my name's Nick Skillicorn, and I help individuals and companies improve their creativity and turbocharge their innovation efforts so that they can finally deliver on the value and ideas they've been struggling to execute. I'm the chief editor of ideatovalue.com and the CEO of Improvides Innovation Consulting. I'm an innovation author with 2 books and a TEDx speaker on creativity, and I've written about innovation across some of the biggest blogs on the world, including ideatovalue.com, Innovation Excellence, SAP Innovation Insights, Wired Innovation Insights, and I'm also now a regular columnist on Inc.com. Before that, I spent more than 8 years as a management consultant at Deloitte, one of the world's largest consulting firms. But I felt like I needed to start my own company to actually help companies grow by implementing new ideas instead of just going through program management methodologies that they'd been taught for decades, which is what I was doing back then. So my ethos is that my advice needs to be based on evidence, either the neuroscience of creativity, case studies of how and why certain companies succeed at innovation, and not just the success that you see in the news. You see, innovation and creativity is not just this motivational thing, these sorts of feel-good articles around this is what Apple does and this is what Google do, the sort of motivational talks you might get in workshops. Because what I've found is these workshops don't usually result in any change, which was one of the main frustrations I had when I was still doing my corporate consulting work. And over the past few years, I'm very proud to have been able to help thousands of people with my online training, my insights, my speaking engagements, and my client consulting work as well. So my ethos on innovation and creativity at a very high level, is formulated around what I call the 3 dimensions of innovation. This is all of the work that needs to happen within an organization, whether or not it be a company or a society, to actually help ideas not only be generated but executed. And today I'm going to focus on the first one of those 3 dimensions, people's creativity. But in upcoming episodes, I'll also be talking about the 2 others, including the teamwork techniques and tools, which are all of the activities that teams do to actually implement ideas, and organizational support, which is what innovation leadership does at a high level to actually encourage innovation on the ground and in a company. So keep an ear out for those upcoming episodes, but I want to get straight into today's episode, which is around people's creativity. Now, when I speak about creativity, I want you to think about it in the sense of what creativity actually means. Creativity is about generating new ideas that are both novel and have value. Now, some people refer to this as being unique and useful, or any of the sort of metaphors you can use, but essentially it's around those 2 components, having some originality, something new, and something that's actually usable or beautiful for other people. This is the definition that academics have agreed upon over the last couple of years when they talk about the study of creativity. And this is something a lot of people aren't really aware of. There are whole fields of academia and science which are purely looking at how creativity actually works in the human mind. What sort of things enable it? What sort of things prevent it? What sort of brain regions get activated when people have ideas? And trying to answer the fundamental questions around creativity, such as, why do people have their best ideas in the shower? Now, that's something I'll come on to later on if you're still interested. But what I want you to realize is there's a whole rigorous study of creativity out there that most people aren't even aware of. And it's led to some pretty interesting insights. For example, one of the reasons the concept of creativity is so controversial for a lot of people, especially in the artistic community, is that some people see creativity as being something that some people have and some people don't have. And quite often they'll refer to this as the left brain versus right brain divide. Some people think that left brain people are the sort of analytical academic people who are very good with statistics and numbers and planning, but who aren't really very good at the arty side of life. Whereas the right brain people, who often refer to themselves as this way, are the sort of people who have a wild imagination, who are able to conjure ideas out of thin air, but they're not that necessarily good at being organized. Now, the reason this myth exists is because during the 1960s and 70s, there were some scientists who were analyzing the brains of people who'd gone through some sort of traumatic brain injury, especially later in life, and who either had things like stroke damage to the left side of their brain or the right side of their brain, and how that changed their personality going forward. And what they sometimes found was people who had stroke damage to the left side of their brain started developing things like a desire to paint or a desire to express themselves through music that they didn't previously have. And this led to several psychologists hypothesize that this must mean, since the left part of the brain isn't as active anymore, the right part of the brain is becoming more dominant and therefore creating this creative ability. And therefore, if you work backwards, there must be this divide between the left brain and the right brain, where the right brain is more engaged in things like creative thought. Now, what more recent scientific analysis has done has actually looked at how people get ideas across all of their brain when they're being put through creative challenges and they're inside something like an fMRI scanner. And what they found instead is that everyone's brain, with both hemispheres, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, has both hemispheres activated when they're being creative. There's no such divide as someone who's being predominantly left-brained or right-brained. It's just a nomenclature that has become a myth, and it's something that we really need to stop talking about in society. There are people who are more comfortable being creative than other people, but that's predominantly due to things like upbringing. And it's also about things like how they see themselves. Quite often, if you go into corporate companies, there'll be a large number of people who, if you ask them, are you creative or not, will say, no, I'm not that creative. And that's because they don't consider themselves artistically creative. They don't see themselves as being able to paint nicely or produce a new work of art, not being able to sing well, not being able to play an instrument, or not being very good at dancing. And this really hurts their confidence in their ability to formulate creative ideas and generate new ideas. Because from a society, we're being told that if you can't execute ideas in the form of art, that must mean you're not very artistic, and that must mean you're not very good at coming up with ideas. Whereas as we go back to the original definition of creativity, it's about generating any idea that is both new and has value. And therefore, there's a whole slew of different ways that people can be creative, even without being artistic. You can be creative by generating new business models, by generating new scientific insights, by generating new mathematical models, or being good at coding or woodworking, or anything that requires you to produce something which didn't exist before. And what this is often referred to is the difference between big C creativity and little c creativity. Big C creativity is the formal being an artistic creative. So the people who are professional painters, the people who are professional singers, the people who write scores for soundtracks for films and things like that. Whereas little c creativity is all of the other creativity that people can have in all aspects of their life. And this is something which everyone has and which everyone can also improve over time. And there's other evidence which really backs this up. For example, when looking at whether or not some people are creative or not, there was a study done to look at how genetics influenced your ability to be creative. And what they did was they looked at more than 100 pairs of twins, some of whom were identical and some of whom were fraternal, so they didn't have the same DNA. And what they found was the majority of people's IQ, their intelligence, was actually correlated with their genetics. But when it came to creativity, only about 30% of your creative ability was correlated with the genes that you were born with, which means that more than 70%, the vast majority of your creative ability, is actually based on your nurture, not your nature, the way you were brought up. And this really comes down to the crux of why a lot of people feel that they're not creative. It's something that's happened to them as they've been growing up. As you go from the sort of first stages of school in kindergarten through to high school, through to university, through to the workplace, there's this increasing requirement to give the right answers and to avoid giving the wrong answers. And essentially, this teaches people to be risk averse. So as you go into your first stages at school, you start learning facts. You start having to recount the capitals of countries or the major cities or political figures, and you'll be tested on whether or not you can execute that knowledge without making a mistake. As you get into high school, you're then tested further, and these results will then determine what sort of future you might have, whether or not you go to university or whether or not you stop studying after high school. As you get into university, again, that reinforces this requirement to give the right answer rather than exploring potential new ideas, because the university grade that you get at the end will determine the job that you get at the end. And finally, when you're then finally in a job, you're being assessed on whether or not you're doing the right thing for the company. And quite often this comes up in things like performance reviews at the year end, or even sometimes multiple times during the year, where you're checked as to whether or not you've made any mistakes. And quite often things like proactively generating new ideas might be seen as only a slight positive, but any mistakes that happen during the time are seen as a much stronger negative. And this whole ethos of getting a stable job, getting good grades to be able to provide for your future family, both in society and families in general, really reinforces this idea as you grow up, it's less and less important to be creative and to express yourself creatively, and much more important to be stable and be rigorous and to only give the right answer. And this results in a lot of people coming out of their youth feeling that they're no longer creative, when the fact is their brain is just as able to generate radically new, beautiful ideas as anyone else. Even if they're not necessarily good at playing the piano, they can come up with ideas in other fields. And especially in whatever field they're working on, they have the ability to come up with ideas there that other people can't come up with. So there's a lot of things happening in the brain that form this, and in addition to the society pressure and the risk-averse nature of work that I just mentioned, there's other more biological things happening in the background as well, which force people to consider themselves not as creative. And one of the most interesting things is about how evolved the human brain actually is, and the way that actually prevents creativity. It's based on routine learning and pattern analysis that the brain is exceptionally good at. And you've got to imagine the brain in the form of a computer. It always wants to use the most energy efficient way of using its energy and its storage capacity. And quite often, it's evolved now to the stage where if it sees certain patterns happening in life that happen again and again and don't result in anything negative happening to it afterwards, quite often the brain, when it starts recognizing a pattern is about to happen again, will just switch to using the memory of the last time it did something rather than analyzing all of the inputs it's getting from your eyes, your skin, your hearing. And it essentially goes on autopilot. Your brain is so advanced that it can start working on autopilot when it starts recognizing patterns that are about to happen. And this is why people quite often get stuck in routines where an excellent example is you might be commuting on your way to work, either driving or on the underground network, and you start your journey, and you essentially start walking the same direction without having to think about it anymore. And quite often people will arrive at their destination and not be able to remember anything about what happened during their journey because their brain essentially just zoned out. It didn't have to process any new information, so it was more efficient to work off memory. And the way this relates to creativity is that once the brain starts seeing all of these patterns, it becomes much more keen to just give the correct safe answer that's lower risk based on memories it knows work than it is to continually analyze information and come up with new, potentially different solutions. And this is why the longer you stay in a job and the longer you routinely do your work, the more you can be set in your ways and the more difficult it can be for people to change their perspective when it comes to listening to a new idea. Quite often you may have been speaking to someone more senior than you about a new idea that you have, and they'll list out a number of reasons why it can't work or it won't work or just this is the way things are done around here. And that's because their brain has just become so comfortable in its routine that it's a bit uncomfortable when it's being forced to shake it up a bit and try and analyze new information in the form of a new idea. And this is all about the comfort barrier that the brain has. And if you want to be able to generate more ideas more efficiently, you have to start learning how to break through your comfort barrier. This is something that can be very difficult and actually quite uncomfortable for many people, sometimes even physically uncomfortable. You might have seen it yourself when you're in a session where you're being asked to come up with new ideas. And some people might dominate the session and throw ideas at the wall, which are really quite similar to things that have happened before. But the moment that someone starts challenging these ideas and saying, no, let's actually push it a bit further, how about something more original? It seems like a light switch just turns off in that moment and people just go a bit silent and they don't want to give the wrong answer. So it's quite uncomfortable for their brain to move away from the memories that it's been using previously. It's the comfort barrier that really stops you from expressing your ideas that are going on in the subconscious in the background, where the majority of your creative ability is actually happening. And there's one last thing that I wanted to talk about today when it comes to the reasons why thinking about creativity in this way is so important. It's because there's a concept called learned helplessness, where if someone has been told so many times that they can't do something, that kind of becomes the truth to them. We don't want to think that we can do something if we've been told over and over and over again that we can't do it. And there's a very sad example of this in the natural world where circus elephants are being brought up throughout their lifetime. And quite often people would go to the circus and be amazed that a man could lead a elephant around a ring using a chain around its neck that's nothing more than a piece of string. Now, these fully grown elephants are far stronger than the string and could break it at any moment if they wanted. But what people don't realize is that when these elephants were younger, they were chained up using heavy chains rather than these little bits of string, and they weren't strong enough to break those chains. And every time they pulled against the chain, it wouldn't budge. And eventually what this taught the elephant was, no matter how hard you pull, it's not going to help and you're not going to be able to break free. And now when these fully grown elephants are pulling on this little bit of string and they feel a little bit of resistance, they just automatically get the instinct that there's no way that I can break this, and therefore there's no way that I can break out of this situation that I'm in. And that's how learned helplessness also works sometimes in our own lives. If we're told over and over again that you're not very good at art, or you're not very good at singing, or you're not meant to be creative in your day job, then that's what we end up telling ourselves. And what we should be doing instead is we should be telling ourselves, look, all of the research out there actually says that if we change our mindset and if we become willing to break through our comfort barriers, then yes, we can actually improve our creativity. There's a lot of research out there that says if you do a little bit of training to push yourself past your comfort barriers, you're going to become better able to generate ideas, not just for your own work, but for all aspects of your life, because your brain becomes more comfortable with this concept of trying out new things, trying out new combinations, trying out different ways of approaching a challenge. And ultimately, that's what's going to help people become more creative. So I hope you've enjoyed this first episode. The next episodes coming up are going to be more about how innovation can work at a team level. So once you have these ideas, what you can do to encourage people to actually take them on board and actually help them become real out in the world and delivering value. Thank you very much. Today's episode was made possible by members of our premium Deep Creativity Training Program. For less than the price of half a candy bar per day, you too can get world-exclusive daily exercises which push your creativity past its comfort barrier to make you better able to generate ideas in all aspects of your life and work. Invest in yourself now by going to www.ideatovalue.com/deepcreativity and finding out more. And don't forget that if you found this episode interesting, to like and share it, and to leave us a review in your favorite podcast player. See you again in the next episode.